Let's look at this issue of far right-wing extremism. A new parliamentary inquiry today will examine the threat posed by far right-wing terrorist groups and also Islamist groups. Both will be included in the review. It comes after an 18-year-old man has been charged with 2 terrorism-related offences after allegedly expressing support for a mass casualty event. To join me now to discuss this and more, I'm joined by Sydney's 2GB radio host, my good friend Luke Grant, and Sky News host Peter Gleeson. Peter, I'm going to start with you if I can. ASIO recently told a committee that far-right extremism is on the rise over the past 4 years. This is, I know from my history in government, been an issue in Europe in particular, but it appears it's now in Australia.
Yeah, I don't think there's any room in this country at all, Peter, for hate speech. I applaud this particular inquiry. I think it's well overdue. And whether it's right-wing groups or whether it's left-wing groups, I mean, we shouldn't differentiate between, you know, the potential for grief, the potential for catastrophic situations arising as a result. So I think the inquiry is overdue. It should be done. And if we can somehow nip in the bud anything that relates to terrorism or hate speech, I think that's a good outcome for Australia.
It's also going to focus, Luke, on social media. And I know social media, with the history I had, the radicalisation of young people, in particular around the time of the rise of Islamic State, social media is a massive worry. We can see in the United States too the way in which Antifa and other activist groups mobilise. This is the far left extremists. They should be included in this, I suspect. But this is where we've got to be really concerned, because social media, it can happen in someone's home. It can be silent and you know, mum and dad see their son say he's going overseas to Bali, and in fact, in a lot of cases, ended up in Syria. This is the worry for parents, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And social media is so poorly policed, isn't it? Look, can we add the word far? Because I think we are talking about far right and far left. A few people I spoke to today about this issue said, gee, you know what? We've got to be sure we're across all the people that would do us harm and the areas that they obviously grow and blossom or form a group. But at the same time, we've got to be careful that we don't set about making it impossible for people to hold a view. It's not illegal, it's not wrong to be right-wing and to hold those views. I think Christina Keneally, who's been dining out on this issue for more than a couple of years now, likes to just call it right-wing. We are talking about a special kind of individual here.
Yes, she does like to use the word right-wing. She drops the far and then she calls people like Peter Dutton a right-wing extremist, which, you know, is a slur when you look at the way in which she uses both of those terms interchangeably. I want to go down to Victoria, because I led with this top of the show. Adam SOMYUREK, you'll remember he was a minister in the Andrews government, lost his footing because of an expose in the media. He fronted the parliament for an address today, a first address since he was expelled, and he went hard on Daniel Andrews. He alleged that the Premier and federal Labor MP Anthony Byrne used multicultural groups in Melbourne's southeastern suburbs as part of what he described as a branch stacking arms race. Luke, this all looked grubby a few months back, but from what he has said in the parliament, of course, it's protected by privilege, so he can't be sued for defamation. But even half of what he said is true. Even if half of it's true, the Labor Party's pretty rotten.
Well, that's right. If half of it's true, we know, given what's happened already in Victoria, that Daniel Andrews will soar to a 90% approval rate. I mean, this guy is untouchable. It's got to be looked at, and I think the question's got to be now put. Where is the inquiry? I mean, at the conclusion of that 60 Minutes program and the 9 papers coverage, we had Labor leadership in Canberra saying, right, we're going to put the national body in there to make sure that this is all weeded out to get to the bottom of things. And from my understanding, it's been rather mute since. They've had a little while now, and I think SOMYUREK today has added more problems for Daniel Andrews, but I just wonder how many Victorians, Peter, actually listen to this stuff and judge in the way that he might be judged elsewhere.
And that's the issue,
There was a report that came out. There's been a great fall away in Labor members, because I think when they went looking for the members, they were phantom members. But Gleeson, up there in Queensland too, there's been some, you know, grubby sort of corruption taint around the government, and it's, what, not even a month old?
Oh, the integrity scandals in Queensland are extraordinary, and we saw during the 4.5 years that Anastasia Palaszczuk was in government, we saw, Jackie Trad being singled out by the Triple C. We saw the Chief of Staff to the Premier, David Barbagallo, singled out by the Triple C. We saw Mark Bailey singled out by the Triple C. A lot of yellow cards, no red cards though, no sort of prosecutions. But now, same deal. Estimates this week has been a field day for the opposition, where they've unearthed another scandal involving the Premier and Mark Bailey, private emails being exchanged. We've also seen accusations where, the former State Secretary of the Labor Party, Cameron Milner, and his mate Evan Moorhead have been sitting side by side with bureaucrats during the lead up to the election campaign. But I guess the question here is, and it's the same that applies in Victoria, Peter, voters don't care. I mean, if it doesn't affect their hip pocket, they're giving a pass to, integrity issues. They're letting these people get away. Look what's happening in New South Wales with Berejiklian and the shredding of documents. I mean, what's happened to our political landscape in the last decade? We're letting them get away with murder.
Yeah, there needs to be a ballot box consequence or the oppositions in all of those various jurisdictions aren't cutting through and helping people understand. If this rottenness continues, you end up with a very rotten governance, regardless of who's in power. Ray Hadley was pretty strong today, condemning Federal Defence Minister Linda Reynolds for some comments that she's been making in and around Brereton. Let's have a listen.
We've got to deal with this. We can't pretend there's nothing to deal with here, and I think that's also understood. But we've got to do that sensitively. That's the course we're endeavouring to chart. I know people's feelings more than feelings. People's even sense of identity is understandably linked to these issues.
Well, could I be as bold to suggest that you should talk to the Defence Minister to stop calling people cold-blooded murderers, as she did yesterday, and maybe that would alleviate some of the pain suffered by people who are dealing with a great deal of pain at the moment in relation to their service of this country.
Well, I understand your point, Ray. I understand it.
Well said. Hey, Luke.
Well, it is. He's impressive, the Prime Minister. I had a caller, and Ray made an excellent point, I hasten to add. I had a caller on the weekend before last, Peter, a fella that served in Timor, and he was so scarred. And I even went to thank him for his service at the end. Caught up in the emotion of this and the guilt that's been thrust on many who did nothing but put the uniform on in service. I thank him for his service, and he couldn't talk. And he said, I just get so triggered now. We have to be so very careful, as Ray said. There's significant mental health issues, and we can't have the minister, and we just can't. So I've read a report.
No, and we saw this. We saw the treatment of soldiers when they returned around the whole time of Vietnam. We saw the consequences of that. It took a long time for them to feel whole again, and we can't have that revisited on them. I want to go to prisons. Prisons are pretty interesting at the moment. Above average we are in a lot of things, but we're also higher in terms of the rate of people we are imprisoning in Australia at the moment than any other time in Federation. Gleeson, the issue is recidivism or reoffending. And according to the report out today, 55% of prisoners return to jail within 2 years. That's a terrible statistic.
Yeah, and that says a lot about what's going on in the jails. I have a personal belief that when people go to jail, they probably learn more in jail about recidivism and more about how to rort the system and engage in illegal acts than if they were outside jail. So I think in many respects it's a sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. But these are alarming statistics. They are statistics that we need to have a really good look at in coming years because, there's been Productivity Commission reports after Productivity Commission reports into whether or not we need to go down the path of more rehabilitation. But when we see cases in Queensland, like the Daniel Morecambe case, like the Childers backpacker case, where these people have killed kids and have made multiple fatalities out of arson, there is a very strong argument that the key should be thrown away, that they should never be allowed back into mainstream society. So it's a really complex area, but when you see those stats, certainly alarm bells ring, don't they?
Hey, now look, I thought everyone was, you know, playing Monopoly, reading books, going for a walk when we were locked up. Yeah, I know, it's by design, but we're told obstetricians, gynecologists, they're all fully booked from March to May next year. So clearly we weren't just sitting at home with board games, hey?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things to say here, and I apologise in advance. First off, this is a lack of care by government. There should have been, I mean, they had people walking around checking how many people you had at home, etc. Every state government should have had a figure in a costume, let's call him Condom Man, walking the streets of the city, knocking on doors, saying, "Oi, anyone there? You need any help?" You know, something like that. And the other thing is, Australia has finally done to each other what government has done to it for years. There you are. Very predictable.
There you
That's
go.
all I have.
There you go.
Peter.
And it is, what, 6:15. Goodness me.
Yes,
Gleeson.
thank you.
When Cyclone Yasi happened in 2011 in Townsville, there was no power for a week. About 9 months later, so in about December 2011, there was an absolute explosion of babies at the Townsville Hospital and North Queensland Hospital. So no power and a pandemic. Well, you know, as Peter Costello said, have one for the country.
Oh, this is one for COVID. This is one for COVID by the look of it. Gentlemen, I will leave it there before we get any bluer. Thank you for your time.